Radio and cspan.org. And watch our recent interview with Mrs. Bush at the George W. Bush Presidential Center in Dallas at 10:30.
The Senate is about to gavel in for the week. Today, they'll consider the 5-year farm bill that passed in the House last week. A vote to limit debate on the measure is expected at 5:30 Eastern. And if that procedural vote meets the 60-vote requirement, a vote on final passage is likely to occur tomorrow. Now we're going live to the Senate floor.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. God of our salvation, whose ear is always open to hear the cries of contrite hearts, consecrate our lawmakers today for your service. Give them tallness of stature to see above the wall of prideful opinions the greatest good for the most people. Lord, provide them with the courage, vision, and wisdom to face these crucial days, confident in the ultimate triumph of your providence. Make their lives as lighted windows of faith, hope, and love amid the encircling gloom. Be the unseen guest at every meeting and guide each of their decisions. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., February 3, 2014. To the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Angus S. King, Jr., a senator from the state of Maine, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to calendar number 297, Veterans Omnibus Bill.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 297, S-1950, a bill to improve the provision of medical services and benefits to veterans and for other purposes.
Mr. President, following my remarks and those of the Republican leader, will resume consideration of the conference report to accompany the Farm Bill, H.R. 2642. The time until 5:30 will be equally divided between the two leaders or the designees. At 5:30, there will be a cloture vote on the Farm Bill conference report. And as we've already announced, the final passage will be tomorrow after our weekly caucuses. Yes, 1977, I'm told, is due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
Clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
S-1977, a bill to repeal Section 403 of the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2013 relating to an annual adjustment of retired pay for members of the armed forces under the age of 62 and to provide an offset.
I would object to any further proceedings, Mr. President, with this legislation at this time.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Bill will be placed on the
oh,
calendar.
I'm so sorry to interrupt.
The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, tonight the Senate will vote in debate on the Farm Bill conference report. I expect the Senate to conclude work on this measure, which will reduce the deficit and protect hungry families. And this will happen, as I indicated, tomorrow afternoon. Passing this legislation will support our nation's farmers and ranchers and more than 16 million jobs in the farm industry. Ensuring our farms remain the most productive in the world and protecting American agriculture jobs is vital for economic recovery. Mr. President, I've been in the Senate a while, in the House a while, as has been the chairman of the Agriculture Committee, the junior senator from Michigan. So I've seen people handle legislation. The work done by Senator Stabenow has been remarkably good. It's exemplary for her to work to the point where we're now going to pass this important legislation. I look forward, as she does, to a strong bipartisan vote on cloture tonight and on the passage of the bill tomorrow. Mr. President, on another topic, as we continue to work toward final passage of the Farm Bill, a bipartisan group of senators has been working behind the scenes to reach an agreement to restore emergency employment and benefits to 1.6 million Americans. In the 3 weeks since the Republicans filibustered a bill to extend this important program, 220,000 more Americans have lost their benefits. And state economies across the country have suffered as unemployed people who are already getting by on so little had to find ways to survive on even less. When unemployment benefits dry up, customers disappear from local stores and businesses suffer. More than $2.2 billion is drained from state economies since emergency unemployment insurance expired. Nevada alone lost $29 million in economic activity just last month. And $28 million has drained from the economy in the Republican leader's home state of Kentucky since emergency benefits expired on December 31st. So it's no wonder 2/3 of Americans, including 65% of independents, believe we should extend unemployment assistance. Helping neighbors who have been hit hard is not only the compassionate thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do for our economy. Mr. President, economists say there's no way to stimulate the economy more than to give these people who don't have jobs some money because they're going to spend it. Since the Republicans filibustered this bill to restore benefits without adding a penny to the deficit, that legislation would have added a penny to the deficit. The toll on local and national economies has been devastating, but the toll on unemployed Americans has been immeasurable. For people who worked all their lives, have lost their jobs through no fault of their own, being unemployed is difficult enough. But worrying about how to pay the rent, put gas in the car, buy groceries, while they look for a new job can be demoralizing. And for the long-term unemployed, some of them who have been struggling to find work for more than a year, $300 a week in unemployment benefits can be the difference between keeping a roof over their heads or becoming homeless. And this is no hyperbole. A 57-year-old Nevada woman wrote me last week to say the loss of her unemployment check was the last straw. Now she's homeless and couch surfing, sleeping on the couches of friends kind enough to take her in. This is what she wrote to me, and I quote, "Can you imagine sleeping on friends' couches at my age? Can you imagine having to sell everything you have worked so hard for just to keep gas in the car in the event that someone calls for an interview?" Close quote. But she did go on to say more. And here's what she said. "I have worked my whole life since I was 16 years old and contributed to a system that is now failing me on a major scale. Millions of people just like this unfortunate Nevada woman, people who worked hard all their lives, contributed to their communities and played by the rules, are on the verge of losing everything, just like her. But it doesn't have to be this way. I remain cautiously optimistic that Republicans will heed their constituents at home and help Democrats restore emergency benefits to Americans in need. Congress can't solve every problem, but we can solve this problem. All we have to do is work together. Democrats and Republicans do what is right for our constituents, our country, and our economy. I urge Republicans to join us to restore these crucial benefits." Would the chair announce the business of the day?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the conference report to accompany H.R. 2642, which the clerk will report.
Conference report to accompany H.R. 2642, an act to provide for the reform and continuation of agricultural and other programs of the reform and the continuation of agriculture and other programs of the Department of Agriculture through fiscal year 2018 and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, the time until 5:30 p.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees. The Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I want to first, as we begin the final debate and vote on the Farm Bill Conference report, I want to thank our Majority Leader for supporting this effort every step of the way. Every time I have gone to him and said, Mr. Leader, we need to have time for some particular procedural vote or to move it along, he has been there, and I want to thank him very, very much for moving this conference report so quickly. I want to thank also Senator Cochran and our entire committee. When Senator Cochran is here later today, I want to particularly speak more about the wonderful partnership that we have had, and I know that the senior senator from North Dakota will be speaking after me. I want to thank him, Senator Hoeven, for being an invaluable partner through this entire process. And it's been just a tremendous pleasure working with the senior senator, and he has made a real impact, and I'm very, very appreciative. As my colleagues know, the last Farm Bill expired 490 days ago. 490 days ago. It's time to get it done. It's time to pass this tomorrow and to give it to the President for his signature. Mr. President, this is not your father's Farm Bill. This is not your father's Farm Bill. This Farm Bill is focused on the future, not the past. We worked long and hard to make sure the policies work for every region of the country, for all of the different kinds of agricultural production we do in our country, from traditional row crops to specialty crops like fruits and vegetables to livestock to organics to local food systems. For the past 2.5 years, we've been working in a bipartisan way with colleagues here in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, and I greatly appreciate our partnership with the chairman in the House and the ranking member, to craft a farm bill that reflects the future in American agriculture and the healthy food choices that consumers are asking for in the marketplace. As we begin this final debate, I want to focus for a few minutes on some of the things that people might not be focused on in this bill. Later today, I'm going to speak about the bill in each of its parts. But there are just 5 things I wanted to highlight as we begin this debate. First, conservation. The Farm Bill is actually our country's largest investment in land and water conservation on private lands, which are the majority of our American lands. That means we're restoring and preserving wildlife habitats and open spaces. We help farmers reduce runoff to keep rivers and streams clean and teeming with fish. Importantly, this bill includes a historic new agreement that ties conservation compliance to crop insurance. And this bill helps prevent plowing up of native grasses through the provision called Sod Saver that will save taxpayers money and preserve sensitive habitat for years to come. Second, energy jobs. This Farm Bill has major investments in American energy independence. I'm very proud to say that this conference report contains the full $880 million investment we passed here in the Senate for renewable and clean energy. It includes my Grow It Here, Make It Here initiative to support innovative bio-based manufacturing that takes crops grown on our farms, uses them to replace petroleum and other chemicals, and transforms them into consumer products. It contains the Rural Energy for America program, known as REAP, to help farmers install on-farm renewable energy and energy efficiency systems to lower their energy usage. And this bill supports the development of the next generation of biofuels, including new technologies using food and agricultural waste. Third, healthy foods. One of the things in this bill among others, is an incentive program based on a successful program in Michigan called Double Up Bucks, which essentially doubles food assistance when a family is shopping for produce at a farmer's market. Speaking of which, we have quadrupled support for farmers markets, 4 times more help than the previous Farm Bill. That means farmers have more choices to find fresh, locally grown foods, and it means farmers have more opportunities to sell those products and grow our rural economies. Fourth, research. Crops and livestock are affected by pests and diseases, and if we are going to continue to be the world's leader in food production, we need to invest in order to fight back. Unfortunately, for years, we've had to cut funding for critical research. This has been a great concern of mine and all of our committee. This Farm Bill includes an innovative solution to that problem. It creates a new agricultural research foundation modeled after health research foundations to bring private and public dollars together to support our scientists all across the country who are working to fight pests, find cures to crop diseases, and focus on food safety and innovation. And finally, Mr. President, reform. This Farm Bill contains the greatest reforms to agricultural programs in decades. We have finally ended direct payment subsidies, which are given to farmers in good times and bad. Instead, we shift to a responsible risk management approach that only gives farmers assistance when they experience a loss. The bill also ends farm payments to millionaires, addresses a loophole that allows people who aren't farming to get payments, and tightens payment limits with a cap on payments that for the first time includes all commodity title programs, including limits on marketing loans. And I might add, we look at every part of the Farm Bill for reform and savings. And I think it's safe to say we're the only area of the federal government who has voluntarily cut spending in our own area of jurisdiction. Counting sequestration cuts, $23 billion in deficit reduction that we have made a commitment to achieve, and we have. So I've spoken about 5 reasons to support the Farm Bill. There are many, many more. But this Farm Bill reflects a major step forward in creating a new paradigm for the future and a real victory for farmers, families, and all Americans who care about protecting our soil and water resources, increasing American energy independence, and the quality of life of rural communities across our country. With that, Mr. President, at this time, so that other colleagues may be able to speak, I will yield the floor.
The Republican leader.
Are we in morning business?
We're currently considering H.R. 2642, the conference report.
I ask consent to proceed on my leader time.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in his State of the Union speech last week, President Obama promised America a year of action. He says he wants to use his pen and his phone to make it happen. Well, here's what I say. Use that pen and that phone of yours today for the Keystone XL pipeline, the jobs that will be created almost immediately. Here's something both parties can agree on. I see my colleague from North Dakota here. Nobody's been more aggressively advocating the Keystone pipeline than he has. This is an important, shovel-ready project for America. Here's the President's chance to work with Republicans on a bipartisan plan to create thousands, literally thousands, of private sector jobs almost immediately. Here's your chance to show you're not captive to the ideological extremists on the left. Here's your chance for action on a policy the American people actually want. Here's your chance, Mr. President. On Friday, the State Department released yet another report concluding what the President and everyone else already knew. The Keystone XL would meet the President's stated requirements on the environment, that there was basically no good reason not to build it. So here's a project that essentially wouldn't cost the taxpayers a dime to build, that would have almost no net environmental effect, and that would put thousands of Americans to work right away. It's an initiative that's supported by an overwhelming majority of Americans, that's supported by unions, by businesses, by Republicans, by independents, and even by prominent Democrats, close to 20 right here in the Senate alone. And yet the President has delayed and delayed for more than 5 years. 5 years now, not because the project really needs to be studied further, but because of pressure from the most doctrinaire fringe of the doctrinaire left. These are the kind of folks who care a lot more about ideology than what makes sense for the middle class. And yet these are the same folks who have a lot of influence in today's Democratic Party. Just look at the war on coal, a war that's being waged with scant concern for the lives of people who live in the states like Kentucky. People are really, really hurting, and it doesn't seem to matter much to these folks. So here's the thing. The President's run out of excuses on Keystone. It's way past time to make a decision. And let's be honest, this decision shouldn't be a hard one at all, because the science, the economics, and common sense all basically point in one direction. And as far as I can tell, ideology is really the only thing that could lead to a different decision here. So is President Obama on the side of the middle class, or is he on the side of left-wing special interests? He needs to use that pen to show us where he stands, and he really ought to do it today. And while he's at it, he should pick up the phone, too, because in his State of the Union address, the President called for Congress to help break down trade barriers that stand in the way of more American jobs. He called for legislation that would help prevent foreign countries from taking the trade jobs that should be going to America's middle class. China and Europe aren't standing on the sidelines, he said, and neither should we, he said. Republicans applauded him for that. He's absolutely right. But now the President's own party is standing in the way of getting anything done. So if there ever was a moment for the President to use his phone, this is it. Because trade should be a bipartisan issue. It sure used to be. Just ask President Clinton. So, Mr. President, America's middle class is hurting. The very least Washington can do for them is to approve job-creating initiatives like Keystone and enhancing American exports. So we'll see soon enough if the President meant what he said about his pen and his phone. If his year of action will really be just that instead of another tired slogan. The answer here is pretty simple. The President needs to step up and lead. Middle-class Americans have taken a backseat to the hard-left extremists in this town for entirely too long. It's time for the President to stand up to these folks and do the right thing. Pick up that phone and that pen, and let's get this done. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Senator from North Dakota.
Mr. President, I ask to proceed on the Farm Bill at this time for discussion.
Senator may proceed.
It's interesting that I follow both our minority leader on the Keystone issue and also the chairman of the Ag Committee in the Senate, the esteemed senator from Michigan, Senator Stabenow, who's done such a marvelous job of leading the Farm Bill. The role of Congress is to govern. People of this great country, more than 300 million people, the country that leads the world, they send us here to govern. And to govern, we have to join together on a bipartisan basis to get something done. And solutions by their nature, particularly solutions to complex problems, are never perfect. There are no perfect solutions. But we're elected to join together, Republicans and Democrats, and solve problems. To put together solutions, though not perfect solutions, that will meet the challenges that this great nation faces. In energy, I echo the sentiments, and I have worked on the Keystone Project for more than 5 years now, first as a governor, now as a senator, and we have tremendous bipartisan support on that project. We need to move forward. The minority leader is right on point. But I come today to talk about something that I believe we are on the cusp of moving forward, something that we've worked on very hard, particularly these last 2 years, and that's the Farm Bill. And I want to begin by thanking and commending the senator from Michigan, who is the chairman of the Senate Ag Committee, who has worked on this with unbelievable dedication and has truly shown the spirit of bipartisanship that I'm talking about. And so I want to begin by thanking our chairman, Senator Stabenow, who has worked with Democrats and with Republicans, who has continually reached across the aisle, not only to her ranking member, the good senator, the senior senator from Mississippi, Senator Cochran, but also to our counterparts in the House, to Representative Frank Lucas, who is the chairman of the Ag Committee in the House, and Representative Colin Peterson, who's the minority member in the House, one from Oklahoma, one from Minnesota, north and south, east and west, across this great country, Republicans, Democrats, senators, House members, to fashion a product that truly is a compromise, but is a vital solution that we need to put in place, and we need to put it in place now for our farmers and ranchers. So I begin with this slide, with this chart, and I have to say, it's the only one I brought. Same chart I'm going to end up with. I'm going to talk about the Farm Bill for a few minutes, but here's why a Farm Bill is so important. And it's not just that it's so important to our farmers and ranchers. It's important to every single American and beyond for these simple reasons. The farmers and ranchers we have in this country produce the highest quality, lowest cost food supply in the world. The highest quality, lowest cost food supply in the world. That's what we're talking about. When we talk about good farm policy, we're talking about something that benefits every single American every single day. Every single day. Now, somebody can say to you, oh, well, gee, we don't need a farm bill. Don't worry about the Farm Bill. Just let the farmers and ranchers do it the way they do, and, we'll see what happens. Really? Really? That's what we should do. We should take a chance on not having the kind of sound farm program we have now, when we have the highest quality, lowest cost food supply in the world, in the history of the world, that benefits every single American every single day. We should say, let's not worry about that. Let's just let it go, see what happens. I don't think that's a very good argument. So let's talk about this Farm Bill that is so important to every single American. 16 million jobs in this country, either directly or indirectly, rely on agriculture. We have a favorable balance of trade in agriculture. And we have a network of farmers and ranchers across this country that do an amazing job every single day. And I'm going to start out by talking about the fact that we actually save money. We save more than $23 billion. So think about it. Think about it. Here's a mandatory spending program where we strengthen the program. We strengthen the farm program. We improve it. We make it more cost effective. And we save $23 billion to reduce the deficit and the debt. How about we go through every other program in government and see how we make it better and reduce spending? Because when we do that, then we'll have done what we're talking about here in the Farm Bill. Seems like a good idea. I see the good senator here from Montana and the senator from South Dakota, as well as the esteemed senator from Michigan. They'll tell you the same thing. Here we are reforming a mandatory program, mandatory spending program, and we're reducing the cost while strengthening the program. Seems like what we ought to be doing. And I know some folks will come down here today and say, well, gee, it could be better because of this, or it could be better because of that, or we should have done this, or we should have done that, and go right back into the same old gridlock, and I guess argue for having yet another extension on a farm bill that expired over a year ago and should have been done a long time ago. But we provide a better program with savings, more than $23 billion, to help reduce the deficit and the debt. What did we focus on this bill to make it more cost-effective, to make it better? As our chairman on the Ag Committee just said, we eliminate direct payments. So you want to talk about reforms? We eliminate direct payments for the first time in a long time, more than $50 billion in direct payments, and we replace it with something that's much more cost-effective. We replace it with strengthened crop insurance so that farmers and ranchers can insure, like other small businesses across this country, to manage risk, even though they operate in an environment that they certainly don't control the risk. When you talk about weather, every year putting in a crop and then waiting to see what the weather will be, that's a very difficult proposition. So we work with them on crop insurance so that they can try to insure the same way other types of businesses insure, and that's much more cost-effective than the old direct payments, which, as our Ag chairman said just a minute ago, those direct payments were going out good years and bad, whether farmers and ranchers need them or not. Now it's insurance, the way other businesses work. And we give them an option. We give them a counter-cyclical program called the price loss coverage that works on a counter-cyclical basis. So if times are tough, if prices are low, if they need help, they get help. And if times are good and prices are high and they have a good crop, they don't get help. That's cost-effective. And so we've tried to design it so we generate real savings, more than $23 billion. But if it works as we hope, we'll generate more savings. So we'll continue to have the highest quality, lowest cost food supply in the world, continue to support a growing job base, 16 million and growing, continue to help us with a balance of trade by creating a favorable balance of trade for this country in agriculture, and we hope with the reforms we made we'll continue to help reduce the deficit and the debt. We also provide strong support for livestock. I think perhaps the senator from South Dakota will tell you about a terrible storm that occurred earlier this winter. There's been a tough winter across the country. But for livestock producers out in the Midwest, in South Dakota, in my home state of North Dakota, and other areas, thousands and thousands of cattle were killed in an early blizzard. We provide help and support for those cattlemen. And we continue to provide other programs that will help them market, not only here in our country, but overseas, to continue to build that favorable balance of trade for our country. And in the dairy program, as was very important to get agreement in the House, yet another example of how the conference had to work to strike the right balance between what everybody wanted, Republican and Democrat, to come up with a program that we could get support on. There is no supply management in the dairy program. It helps our smaller dairy producers with an insurance-type product, and the cost of the premium increases with higher levels of production by the dairy producer. So it's designed, I think, the way that I think everybody should feel is a fair basis, where, again, when our smaller dairy producers need help, it's there, but it's cost-effective and it's done without supply management. Conservation title. Again, the senator from Michigan talked about the importance of conservation. Now, here's an example where we had disagreement, right? This goes to the heart, I think, of what's in this Farm Bill. Here's an example, as I've said, that our chairman did a marvelous job on the Ag Committee, working with our ranking member and everyone else. But on conservation, I have to say I had some different ideas than what is in the final compromise bill. I felt that crop insurance and conservation should have remained decoupled, but they're not. They are coupled in the final product. But to make things work, again, we sought and found compromise. We made changes in the bill that truly make the conservation provisions much more farmer-friendly. What do I mean by that? I mean, it's not retroactive. It's forward-looking. The conservation rules in the bill apply going forward. They don't go back retroactively to the start of the last Farm Bill. Very important. You can't put people in a situation where they're being forced to go out and change their farm or ranch on a retroactive basis. Very important. Another provision that we were able to include in the report language is mitigation. Farmers and ranchers do a tremendous job on conservation. I love to hunt. and I love to fish. My wife likes to fish even more. When I'm out there hunting, I see what's going on. I see who's taking care of the land and making sure that the water's there, the cover is there, the food is there for wildlife, deer, birds. And so any conservation program to be truly effective, you've got to enlist the farmers and ranchers' support so that the conservation community and farmers and ranchers are working together in a way that works for those individuals, those business people, those families, those farmers and ranchers who are out there making their living. Every day they're out there. They're not just out there once in a while. They're not just out there sometimes like I am when I go out hunting. They're out there all the time making it work. So these provisions have to work for them. And that's why when we talk mitigation, the mitigation rules have to work for the people that own the land, the farmers and ranchers. And that's why we work to include language that makes sure USDA is focused on an acre-for-acre approach as long as there's reasonable and commensurate value, and we set up a fund to help them do that. And I think we achieved a good result. All of the wildlife groups, the conservation groups, and the hunting groups are on board. They're endorsing this bill, even the NRA endorsing this bill. Strong support from conservation groups, from hunting groups, fishing groups, wildlife groups. But at the same time, I think we've got provisions in there that truly make it farmer-friendly so that it works for our farmers and our ranchers. And I know that was something that we had to work on very hard to get to, but is vitally important. Energy title, strong energy title. We included the provisions and, in fact, strengthened the beginning farmer and the beginning rancher provisions. And then I want to end on reforms. Clearly, with our debt and deficit, it's vitally important that we find ways to find savings. So as we go through all the discretionary spending programs, which is 1/3 of the federal budget, we have to find savings. And we're working to do that. Since I've been here, we've reduced discretionary spending from $1.35 trillion to roughly $1 trillion. So since the beginning of 2011, discretionary spending at that time was $1.35 trillion. This year and next year it will be about $1 trillion. So you can see we've reduced discretionary spending about 35% and over this 5-year stretch, and that's without counting inflation. But 2/3 of the government is mandatory spending. 2/3 is mandatory spending programs. So we've got to find ways to make revisions so that we protect and preserve the programs that are vital to us, like Medicare and Social Security, but we also have to find ways to take these mandatory programs and find savings and reforms like we do here in this Farm Bill. And so when we talk about eliminating direct payments, when we talk about payment limitations that for the first time apply to everything, whether you're getting the ARC program, the Ag Risk Coverage, or the Price Loss Coverage program as in your farming operation, whether it's a marketing loan program, your total payments can't exceed $125,000. Now, that's the first time we've had a cap that applies to everything, right? We've had caps before, but they didn't apply to everything. That is a real reform. And you're going to hear others come down and say, well, gee, it should have been better, it should have been like this. But I'm telling you, we have not had one that applied to everything before where you truly had a cap. So when we talk about eliminating direct payments, when we talk about a cap that applies to everything, that's a real reform. Furthermore, we have an AGI limit, adjusted gross income limit, that also applies to everything for the first time, just like the payment limit. Right now, if you make $900,000 or more, you don't get any of those program assistances. Before, again, it did not apply across the board. That's real reform. That's real reform. And I think in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, where we knew it would be tough to come up with a compromise. You know, clearly differences of opinion on each side of the aisle and between the Senate and the House. Here again, I want to commend the leaders of our conference committee, Senator Stabenow, Senator Cochran, Representative Lucas, Representative Peterson, and the members of the conference committee. There was a lot of work to do in this conference committee. And to get an agreement on food stamps, on SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Payments, was no small effort or accomplishment. And it, again, like all compromises, if you look at it, it really is fair to both sides. The compromise itself, based on the reforms we made in LIHEAP and getting the states to truly make sure that we don't have waste, fraud, and abuse, but that people who need help get help, we've truly strengthened those provisions. The scoring by CBO is about $8 billion reduction. But again, we get our economy going, these kind of reforms will generate more savings while still ensuring people who need help get help. Now, if you look at that number, then it's very close to what the Senate said they had to have. So for those who are in that camp, they should feel like, you know, this is a bill they can support. That's a fair compromise. And on the House side, where clearly there was a desire to have a significantly larger number, if you look at this as a two-step process, where you take the savings that come out of expiration of the stimulus program, where there was about $11 billion in savings, and combine it with the reforms we made here, the 11 and the 19, that was $20 billion. That was close to the House's original number. Like all good compromises, it is fair, and it does seek to get the kind of reforms that I think the American public wants, to make sure there is not waste, fraud, or abuse in the food stamp program, but for those that need help, they get that help. Again, I want to commend not only the leadership in the Ag Committee, but also the leadership in the House and the Senate for recognizing that it is time to put a solution in place for the American people. And again, no solution is perfect, but we cannot continue to operate with an expired policy that not only does not give our farmers and ranchers the certainty they need to continue to produce the highest quality, lowest cost food supply, which benefits every single American, but where we don't achieve the very savings and reforms that we've been sent here by the American people to achieve. So it's time to vote. We'll vote on this farm bill now. There was a very strong vote in the House, 250 to 160, strong bipartisan support on both sides of the aisle. The Senate needs to step up now and put this solution in place for the American people. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from South Dakota.
I rise today to urge my colleagues to support the Farm Bill Conference report. It's taken a long time to get to this point, with several unnecessary roadblocks along the way. But we're finally near the finish line, and it's time that we conclude this process. I commend Chairwoman Stabenow, Ranking Member Cochran, Chairman Lucas, and Ranking Member Peterson for their leadership in developing this reasonable conference report. The Agricultural Act of 2014 will reduce the deficit, restructure our ag support programs, continue to feed the hungry, aid livestock producers hit by the Atlas blizzard, and enable consumers to know where their food comes from. This conference report certainly isn't perfect. As with any legislation that is this important and far-reaching, it's impossible to fully satisfy everybody. But this is a reasonable compromise. Our ranchers will benefit significantly from this bill. Not only does this compromise enable country of origin labeling to continue, as well as maintain USDA's ability to ensure a fair and transparent marketplace, but it also contains critical livestock disaster assistance programs to help ranchers in my state who are still recovering from the 2012 drought and last year's terrible blizzard. My ranchers lost tens of thousands of livestock, and they've been left hanging because of congressional inaction. With passage, they'll finally be able to cut the aid they need. Beyond the important assistance for livestock producers, this bill also reforms our farm programs by eliminating direct payments and by strengthening the crop insurance program. It also offers key support for young and beginning farmers and ranchers, and it contains reasonable conservation compliance requirements for farm program and crop insurance eligibility. This legislation represents more than just assistance to our farmers and ranchers. It's also a jobs bill. It contains mandatory funding for several energy and rural development programs, and it will help USDA deal with a huge backlog of pending rural water and wastewater infrastructure applications. Hundreds of rural communities across the country, including Aberdeen, Watertown, and Brookings in South Dakota, will also continue to be eligible for rural housing programs as a result of a provision I included in the Senate-passed Farm Bill that is maintained in this conference report. I would also like to highlight provisions to address some key forestry issues important to the fight against the pine beetle and the Black Hills. This bill provides the Forest Service and private forest landowners with critically needed tools and flexibility. This includes permanently authorizing stewardship contracting to combine timber harvest with the needed conservation work building on the Mountain Pine Beetle Response Project in the Black Hills by streamlining activities to combat insect and disease epidemics and clarifying the forest exemption to Clean Water Act permitting. These changes provide needed certainty for both private and public forest managers. While I'm overall very pleased with this conference report, there are some disappointments. The senior senator from Iowa and I have worked for years for meaningful payment limitations. In fact, we were able to include in the Senate bill a hard cap on payments as well as new language to define farm program eligibility requirements. The House bill contained nearly identical language. However, this conference report actually loosens payment caps, and it punts the decision of defining actively engaged to the Secretary of Agriculture. This is frustrating. However, moving forward, I will urge USDA to follow the intent of the Senate and House bills with respect to farm program eligibility when it undertakes rulemaking. Even though I'm not fully pleased with everything in this conference report, I think it does represent a compromise. As such, I urge my colleagues to join me in passing the bill. If we don't, food prices will rise, ranchers in my state will be forced out of business, and we won't get the deficit reduction or reforms to our farm programs. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Montana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak on the importance of passing this farm bill that's in front of us. But I not only speak as a senator, but I also speak as a farmer, someone that's involved in production agriculture. When I'm not wearing a suit and casting votes or traveling around the state, finding out what's on the minds of Montanans, I'm farming. From planting to harvesting to accessing seed to hauling food to the market, I know firsthand the life in production agriculture. And I know that whether you're a farmer, a rancher, or a forester, it can be very tough because there's a lot of uncertainty. Uncertainty that I witnessed firsthand last summer when I visited the fields of Montana's Gallatin Valley, a valley that was devastated by a hailstorm literally hours before harvest was to begin. Or the uncertainty caused by the blizzard that cost South Dakota thousands of cattle this last fall. Farmers and ranchers understand and accept that uncertainty is a fact of life because we deal with weather. They know it's part of what comes with being in production agriculture. But what they can't accept and what they shouldn't accept is a federal government that takes 6 years in drafting a 5-year farm bill. We don't need that kind of uncertainty, and that's why we need to pass the farm bill we have today. When I talk to my fellow producers in Montana and around the country, they tell me that a lack of a long-term farm bill is preventing them from making critical business decisions. Without a long-term farm bill, farmers don't know what crop insurance is going to look like. They don't know what to expect from future farm loans. It's hard to plan ahead and invest in next year's crop or expand operations. I mean, you can't even do the simple business planning without that farm bill. Many of us here in the Senate got our start in business and know the importance of a predictable business environment. Well, farming and agriculture is no different. You need certainty to grow and to prosper. The fact is, Mr. President, is that the lack of a long-term farm bill is hurting economies from Montana to Maine. Folks need and are demanding a responsible long-term farm bill, and I think it's time for the Senate to do the right thing, and that is pass the 5-year farm bill. But I'm not encouraging folks to vote for this bill just for the sake of certainty. You should also vote for it because I think it strengthens the hands of farmers, ranchers, American families who depend on them. Livestock owners will see many benefits from this farm bill. This 5-year plan makes livestock disaster assistance programs permanent and retroactive, helping those South Dakota ranchers that I spoke of a minute ago to recoup their October losses, as well as Montana ranchers who lost cattle to drought back in 2012. All in all, livestock owners will be better able to manage risk, improve production, and meet the new challenges because of this bill. When it comes to farmers, the bill removes the term limits on USDA guaranteed farm loans so farmers can continue to access credit at banks in rural communities. It also provides more support for farmers and ranchers just getting their start in agriculture. In rural America, we need more young producers willing to get up and work hard, keep small family farms and ranches going, and this bill is a positive step for beginning farmers and ranchers. Conserving lands is another critical issue across this country, particularly rural America. Farmers and ranchers are the true stewards of the land, and this bill continues that proud American tradition. Whether by improving portions of the Conservation Reserve Program or Sodbuster, this farm bill supports our outdoor economy by working with farmers and ranchers to preserve more native prairie for wildlife habitat. And that is good news for the hunters and anglers of this country, and Montana is no exception. It's good news for the folks who sell rifles and waders and the guides that show our hunters and anglers where to fish and where to hunt. All in all, this great outdoor economy adds up to $6 billion in the state of Montana alone. This bill also includes an extension of PILT payments to rural counties who can't generate enough revenue from lands that are controlled by the federal government. This is a big deal in rural America. And it continues strong country of origin labeling so as consumers know where their meat was born, raised, and processed, giving them the option to buy U.S.-made meat if they so choose. Now, the big multinational meatpacking firms may not like it, but for American ranchers it is critically important, as it is for our consumers. Why? Because Americans know that we produce the finest beef in the world. This 5-year farm bill takes all these positive steps while saving taxpayers $23 billion by making tough choices in the Nutrition Assistance Program and changing how we apply farm subsidies. Chairman Stabenow and Ranking Member Cochran have written a common-sense bill that is supported across our agricultural community. I want to thank them for that. In an era when too many folks look for reasons to vote no instead of yes, it takes strong and determined leaders to bring a responsible bipartisan bill like this to the floor. And that's why, because I'm in production agriculture especially, the work that Chairman Stabenow and Member Cochran did for the American farmers and ranchers need to be commended. That commitment is going to keep America's rural economy strong. The senators from Michigan and Mississippi are the reasons this bill is finally at the finish line. Thanks to them, we're on the verge of approving a bipartisan bill that will strengthen production agriculture and support family farmers and ranchers across this country. My wife and I took over our family's farm in north central Montana in 1978. We had land and we had a strong work ethic, but we had little else. So with some hard work and a few good decisions and weather that cooperated, our farm's doing pretty well right now. Our story can be repeated across rural America, but production agriculture will only be strong if it has the certainty that comes with a common sense, long-term farm bill. And that's what's in front of us today. A bill that lets farmers and ranchers know how to plan ahead, how to make their books balance. A bill that lets distributors allocate resources and make sound business decisions, and a bill that takes responsible steps to strengthen programs that are working and ending others that are not. Mr. President, let's not leave farmers and ranchers and all Americans who depend on them high and dry again. We, with strong support for production agriculture, with strong support for a nutrition program and with a bill that saves taxpayers significant dollars, it is time to vote yes and send this farm bill to the President's desk. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
Before the senator from Montana leaves the floor, I just want to thank him for his wise counsel throughout the process of writing the Farm Bill. It's nice to have a farmer in the Senate who can give you practical ideas and reactions, and this is somebody who's been out there fighting for the farmer, small farmers, to be able to make sure that they've got the same shot to be successful as the big producers. And I just want to thank Senator Tester not only for his support, but he has a very key voice here in supporting farmers and ranchers across the country, and I've very much appreciated his counsel as we bring this to conclusion.
Senator from Michigan.
Thank you. I would ask that time during the quorum call be equally divided.
Without objection.
Put in a quorum call, please.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Give me a chair.
Mr. President,
Senator from Alabama.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the Agricultural Act of 2014 is the culmination of a lot of hard work by our conferees, Representative Mike Rogers and Martha Roby from Alabama, as well as my colleagues here in the Senate, Senator Stabenow and Cochran and others. The important legislation contains a number of commendable measures, And during my time in the Senate, I've been a strong supporter of Alabama's farmers and believe this legislation does make a number of positive reforms over the long term that should help in the efforts to reduce, not grow, the involvement of the federal government in agriculture. For example, the legislation transitions farm subsidies from a system of direct payments to a more market-based crop insurance support program. Senator Lugar always favored that. I think many other people who've thought about agriculture think that's the right path to go, and I have supported that. As a 5-year bill, this legislation should also give our farmers and their families some certainty that they need to make prudent planning decisions and give them choices to select programs that best meet their needs. So I believe our farmers can move forward and help our nation remain a global leader in the production of food and fiber, which is critical to our economic well-being and national security. The final bill also contains other essential provisions to reduce unnecessary regulations, such as the inclusion of a Forest Environmental Protection Agency forest road fix, which I have strongly supported. It's just an excessive intervention into the forest industry to have the EPA involved in the issues as they're talking about here, and I think we've clarified that so that won't be a problem. It also contains provisions that are designed to help Alabama catfish producers, peanut and cotton farmers, and forest landowners who compete in the global economy. I'm pleased the final bill contains my provision to help farmers in states like Alabama that have not significantly used irrigation practices in the past. Under the current USDA policy, farmers have been excluded from the federal irrigation program if they don't have a history of irrigation, and that makes no sense where you're trying to involve more people to smartly use irrigation. And I thank the ranking member and the chair of the committee for supporting us on that, Senator Stabenow. My provision will help ensure that more Alabama farmers are able to access these programs, and it's been a priority of mine for some time, although it's a small part of the overall bill. As a whole, the Congressional Budget Office claims that the Farm Bill will reduce the deficit by $16.6 billion over 10 years. This is a step, a small step, however, in the right direction. It means that if current law were extended without change, we would be spending $16.6 billion more than if this bill were passed. So that's positive. I wish we could do more. We can do more. Unfortunately, we haven't done more, but that's a positive step. It's fair to say that the elimination of counter-cyclical and direct payments almost entirely is a historic occasion. Of course, Congress enacted Freedom to Farm in 1996, which was intended to slowly phase out these kinds of subsidies. But when times became particularly difficult for our farmers in the years following the 96 bill with low prices and drought, these programs were, in essence, reinstituted by Congress. And the retreat and the movement away from federal intervention was greatly eroded. In my view, and that's all I have at the bottom, my view, Congress should steadily seek to reduce the role of the federal government in farming. But millions are dependent on farming for their livelihoods, and a thoughtful, conservative approach to reducing federal intervention would be to continue this reduction steadily over time. It surely can't be done smartly all at once without some real dislocation in the agricultural marketplace. Although, I must say, I think we could have gone a good bit further this year. But I remain concerned that the reform to the SNAP program, the food stamp program, are much too modest. I hope our actions here today help set the stage for continued and badly needed reforms that I and others have outlined during our debate on the Farm Bill in 2012 and 2013, and now this year. Yet it seems clear to me that the bill before us today, regrettably, does not go nearly as far as it could in addressing the abuses and the wastefulness that are contained in those programs. For example, the bill spends $956 billion over 10 years. Nearly 80% of that is for the SNAP program, Agricultural Support Food Programs. It is, in reality, as someone has said, a SNAP bill, a food stamp bill. 80% of the money goes to that one problem. It asks our farmers to contribute a disproportionate share to deficit reduction. The bill cuts food stamps by only about $9 billion, and it cuts the agriculture programs by about $8 billion. That sounds fair, balanced, as my colleagues like to use that word, balanced, but you're cutting $8 billion from the 20% of the program and the other $8 billion from the 80% of the program. And that's not balanced. And I want to say to my colleagues, there's no intent or desire on any member of this Senate to have people who are hungry remain hungry, and people who are needing food not to have food. What we're saying is there are great numbers of abuses in the program that have clearly been identified and should be fixed and haven't sufficiently been fixed. Though it repeals direct payments, the bill replaces those payments with new programs to seek to help farmers in a more effective way that will cost at least $27 billion. So we reduce some programs and increase others. I think most of that is in the ag insurance policy, which is probably, in general, a better way to help our agriculture industry. Congress needs to be careful about spending more money. And many senators and independent analysts think these new programs may cost even more than CBO is currently projecting. It moves money from direct support to crop insurance, and I think that could be good. So we've studied the Farm Bill Conference report and note that the Congressional Budget Office has concluded it increases spending in 2014 by $2.1 billion above the spending limits Democrats and Republicans agreed to in December. It's been more than we agreed to in December. $2.1 billion over the limits we agreed to in a bipartisan way. So in the Senate, this would normally subject the legislation before the Senate to 2 points of order, budget points of order, because it violates the budget spending limits we just agreed to. Proponents of the bill would then be required, those who to either reduce the spending in the bill to the agreed-upon level or gather a supermajority of 60 votes to waive the point of order and agree to violate the budget. However, the Senate majority, our Democratic colleagues, well, let me just say it this way. That's not fair to say. The majority in the Senate have deployed a budget gimmick with Republican support that renders these points of order and consequently the minority's right to enforce the spending limits ineffective. And this is something I predicted 2 months ago when this legislation, when the Ryan-Murray legislation passed. I said on December 18th that as that deal was being debated, quote, with 57 different reserve funds, the Murray-Ryan spending bill that is before us now will allow Senator Reid and Chairman Murray to bring to the floor a practically unlimited number of big tax and spending bills. It will not be subject to the 60-vote limit. Normally, the minority party would be able to raise a point of order under Section 302F of the Budget Act. So, the Budget Committee chairman has decided to make an adjustment to the budget spending levels, and she can do so because of the Ryan-Murray spending agreement that passed the House, the Republican House, and the Senate. And this will allow increased spending in the Farm Bill above the amount we agreed to. Though 2 points of order would lie, they are voided in the Ryan-Murray legislation because of the powers granted to the Budget Committee chairman in that legislation. So let me explain this power that was granted. Yet again, the Ryan-Murray Agreement includes 57 deficit-neutral reserve funds. Operationally, a reserve fund allows the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee to adjust allocations of budget authority and outlays to a Senate committee or committees, aggregate levels of budget authority, outlays, and revenues, and other appropriate levels prior to Senate consideration. This allows the proposed legislation to avoid most spending and revenue-related budget points of order as long as the measure complies with both the subject matter and deficit neutrality instructions in the reserve fund. In the case of the Farm Bill, the Ryan-Murray budget numbers refers to the Senate-based budget, which garnered bipartisan opposition. So the budget, S-Con Res 8 in Section 313, gives the chairman of the Budget Committee the power to adjust the budget for any farm bill, explicitly reauthorization of the Farm Bill, quote, provided that such legislation would not increase the deficit over either the period of the total of fiscal years 2013 through 2018 or the period of the total of fiscal years 2013 to 2023. Complex words I just read. But in other words, the Farm Bill is now in a situation where it can increase spending in the first fiscal year and promise that it will recoup the money later on, which is exactly what this bill does, and the minority's rights are diminished in its ability to stop it because of the Ryan-Murray budget agreement. So that's what I warned about in December. Now, some said it wasn't anything to it. I warned that it was, and I think we're already seeing that there is something to the complaints I made. I said on the floor of the Senate, quote, the power that senators had to block tax and spend legislation that breaks spending limits has been eroded significantly by Ryan-Murray. The danger is that we will certainly have spending increases in the short term, but we have only promises of spending limitations in the future. There is no point of order that lies against the bill because of the Ryan-Murray budget agreement. Passed by Congress, I acknowledge, passed by the body, but I'm not sure members of the House or Senate fully understood the impact of what occurred after that secret meeting between the two budget leaders. It's far from perfect, and we'll see how we proceed with the Ag bill. I appreciate those who've worked on it. We need to do the right thing for agriculture. It's an important part of our nation's economy and our national security. I have invested a lot of time and effort in it, as I know most of my colleagues have. And I appreciate the work of those who've produced this legislation for us. I thank the chair and will yield the floor.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, as we all know, the Senate and House agriculture leaders unveiled the long-awaited conference report last week for the 2014 Farm Bill.